we can either protect ourselves and say, well, there's a very, 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 very low chance this is going to work out. So like, let's detach or let's stop talking to each other or whatever, to the alternative, which was, okay, yes, that sucks. And also, what if we got the good side of the deal, which was each other and this really beautiful relationship. And we learned how to manage that fear. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Everyone, this is my favorite person in the whole world, Joshua. So I have been wanting to bring you on here because not only are you my favorite person, but also you are the person that I value most when it comes to healing and growth, and you always inspire me. And a lot of what I talk about on this podcast is a result of us having these conversations first. And so I'm just excited for other people to get a glimpse at this brain that I love so much too.
Thank you.
So I thought we could just literally put the mic up and have a conversation that we normally would.
Perfect.
So today we are addressing the fear of the unknown and like being in a season or a period of waiting, feeling like, you know, you're in limbo, which we are very familiar with.
Yes.
This is actually perfect timing because today, episode 7 was released, which is about our story of how we met and the kind of journey after that of waiting and not knowing what our future would look like.
Right.
And I mean, now here we are, like on the other side, which is everything that we ever hoped and dreamed and prayed for, but it was definitely not easy.
It's not an easy journey.
In the middle of it.
Correct.
And so many times, I mean, we've had so many conversations beforehand, mainly me, emotional or in tears and inconsolable, just wanting to know for sure that things were going to work out. And it's just so hard to not know or not have those answers. So that's why we picked this topic, right?
Yes, correct.
Because we could have talked about anything under the sun, but I remember you saying that this topic was what stuck out to you. So would you like to share why?
Sure. I think this topic is important because every one of us, we all find ourselves in the state of limbo or states of disappointment or seasons that feel like they're just never going to end or there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Before we met, I had been divorced right at 3 years, had 3 kids, but never happened to find my person. There was no right fit that met values and all the other things of importance. And so, yeah, definitely hit a point where I just felt hopeless. Just put my hands up, trusting that if it ever was going to happen, then it wasn't in my control because obviously I could not make anything happen in my own strength. So yeah, just a season of trust, and you kind of came out of left field in a beautiful way and changed my life. I wanted to talk about this topic. I feel like it's super important. It teaches a lot of lessons about resiliency in those seasons of doubt and give us a lot of skills and tools to walk through different seasons like that as they come and go.
So we're going to share about our story in a minute. And you kind of touched on your season of waiting leading up to our meeting. I know for me, learning how to trust and surrender, it has not come easy. It's still not, I don't think it'll ever be easy for me, but thankfully I have you to work through it. When we were planning this episode, we were talking about what happens if people don't learn how to deal with uncertainty, if they don't learn how to deal with not being in control, because that's ultimately what this is. Like fear of the unknown, we fear it because we don't have any control. Correct. And I suck at that. I really suck when I'm not in control. And I think people act out of that fear and that anxiety. And it's so easy for our happiness to be dependent upon the circumstances and only the things that we see right in front of us.
Right.
I remember many times just asking you, like, well, how do you, like, you kept telling me, well, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. And I was like, well, how do you know that?
Yeah, it's just like any time we're consumed by fear or anxiety, it manifests in different ways. We get angry, we get hopeless, we start feeling like, why am I even doing this?
So in case you didn't listen to episode 7, we're just going to give you like a Cliff Notes overview of how we met and our story and why this is relevant to what we're talking about today. So from the beginning, when we met, it was very bittersweet because on one hand, we had met someone that shared similar core values.
Mm-hmm.
We both had gotten married at a similar age. We are the exact same age. We were married for the same length of time and ended our marriages for very similar reasons. And so we connected on this very deep level. But there was the elephant in the room, which was
I lived in Georgia and she lived in Louisiana.
Is that funny?
It was brutal.
Yeah.
But beautiful at the same time.
So from the very beginning, we have had to face the choice of like, do we keep going, not knowing if this is ever going to work out? And I think so commonly, well, I know many other people in our situation, I mean, could look at us deciding to still like talk and do the long distance thing as like stupid or crazy or like too high risk. Like, why would you even get involved with something that has the potential to hurt you? And I think a lot of people live like that. Do you remember the message I sent you after we met? I was crying because I had already given in to knowing that like it wasn't going to work out. And so shortly after we started talking, all the language I was using was under the assumption that, well, this is just never going to be able to work. It was like the elephant in the room, but like I still wanted to talk to you, and you were becoming someone who I valued and wanted in my life. So I don't want to stop talking to you, but at the same time, it seemed inevitable that it wouldn't work out because, you know, we have other co-parents to consider and just everything adding up to seem impossible.
Right. I think we were both at the point in the beginning where it was like, man, we just had the best weekend of our lives and the most like life-changing moments. And then the elephant in the room was like, man, there's too many odds stacked against us to make it.
But we still decided to do it anyway.
We still did it anyways. Hey, here we are. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if there was like a pivotal moment where we decided like, okay, we're going to do it. I stopped saying like, well, this is never going to work out, to us making the choice to lean in and decide to be in the present moment and to stop living in that fear of what could or couldn't happen. And I remember it being like a huge lesson for me. Yeah. Like something that I had never done before.
Right.
The elephant was in the room and then we kicked him out of the room. We're like, screw you. You're not going to decide what our future holds. We're going to do this anyway.
Right.
So get out of here.
Right.
So do you remember, like, I feel like we had a conversation about it or some sort of realization that helped us not let the elephant control everything.
Right. So the week after was that week that I was like so worried because I didn't want to ever hurt you. I knew how hard I was falling for you because you're amazing. I was definitely more of thinking the logical standpoint. Man, this is never going to work. We're so far away. I have 3 kids. You have 1. We have so many things stacked up. Obviously, our feelings it's not something that would just go away.
We had this very conversation where we were talking about our options, and we talked about controlling the outcome and not knowing the future. And we evaluated the pros and cons of the situation. Like, we can either protect ourselves and say, well, there's a very, 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 very low chance this is going to work out. So like, let's detach or let's stop talking to each other or whatever, to the alternative, which was, okay, yes, that sucks. And also, what if we got the good side of the deal, which was each other and this really beautiful relationship. And we learned how to manage that fear. Right. Like, that's what we decided.
Right.
But I also had no idea how to do that because I feel like it's everyone's natural instinct. We always jump to protect ourselves from more pain and hurt.
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like that was a big deal for us. And it was like an intentional choice to evaluate everything.
Yeah, so we did come to that point. We had the conversation of weighing out the odds and like, why not choose this thing that was so perfect and pure and not let our fear, I mean, like, what if? And I, like, at one point, I was so nervous, like on the fence, because I had been divorced for so long and raising my kids and being only a dad. And now choosing something that could potentially be painful.
And after so much pain for both of us.
Correct. I mean, we had that conversation basically to not let that win, to see what happens no matter what happens. Say, why not give it a shot? What do we really have to lose? Like, we already felt pain. We already know what that's like. And this could be something beautiful for us to not rob ourselves of even trying.
Instead of focusing on what there is to lose, we just decided that we didn't want to let something slip away that had the potential or already was so good. There's something that helped me overcome that fear and like, oh, what if this doesn't work out? What if this doesn't work out? What if this like hurts? Like, I don't know what the future holds, like all of those paralyzing things. But we talked about creating an action plan or like how we would overcome and combat that. And we knew like if we didn't do that, then the fear would win.
Right.
And we would just be acting out.
Correct.
And something that really helped me was to focus on only the present moment.
Right.
Learning how to let go of like, what if, let go of that fear of the future, fear of the unknown, and only focus on you and us and everything that we had together and had found in each other. Anytime that fear would come up, I would just redirect back to us FaceTiming and like reading over the phone. Like that was the only thing happening and nothing else mattered. Like I didn't have to have the future figured out. I didn't need to know for sure that it was going to work out because being on the phone with you was like the best thing ever. And so by letting those fears sink in, it was taking away from the present moment. And I didn't want anything to taint that precious thing. Like that was our biggest motivator, I think, was how do we protect this sacred gift and not let all of this brokenness and all of these things that we've experienced in our previous relationships and that the human condition experiences all the time. Like, what is our battle plan? And that was like number one was, okay, we have to stay present. Otherwise, we're going to lose.
Yeah, I think in many times, if we have those moments of unknown, we hit this point and we have to make like a choice of, is this worth us enduring this? Can we make it? And really like going within to evaluate yourself and the circumstance around you. And for you and I in our story, a lot of times we were victims of our circumstances. We lived in different states and it was the most beautiful things. And also it was the most painful season too, because it was so many disappointments, so many things that could just come out of nowhere to just really wreck us, that we had to really not just evaluate, but we really had to lean into one another and be our best selves to show up for one another in those moments, because it was painful. And in a beautiful way, it was painful because we loved one another so much and we wanted this so much that we really had to endure. So for us, we evaluated, is this beautiful thing to us worth all this pain and all of this like quote unquote suffering that we had to endure to reach this end goal and to find this place of patience?
It was constantly coming at us too. It wasn't just the fact that we lived in separate states. Every day there was new circumstances or a new fear or a new trigger that would re-trigger all of these things over and over. And so it's constantly at every turn, whether it was how are we going to pay for these flights to how are we going to explain it to our co-parents. There were so many things we had to figure out. So it was like both. It was this beautiful thing and also, like you said, a lot of suffering, a lot of stress. I think anyone who is in a season of suffering, the way that you find your way out of it is it's like you hit this breaking point. You hit this limit of pain. Like, I cannot do this anymore. Like, I don't have any more tolerance for pain or suffering. So I only have two options. I can either die inside and let this break me, or I can try to figure out another way.
Mhm.
And for us, learning how to make peace with the unknown and not have it all figured out and releasing that control, that was our way of figuring out how to deal with it
Mhm.
and breaking free of it consuming us and it making the decisions for us and us becoming a victim to our circumstances.
Correct. Yeah. Proud of that one. It's a good one. So I think some lessons that we learned through our journey together, ways that we coped through the pain and all of the unknown, definitely leaning on each other. We really took every opportunity to focus on each other and just make the most of every second that we had, whether that was phone calls or text or just really being super intentional of how we loved one another and how we walked through the day. It was a major perspective change, and it was a daily thing that we had to do because some days we would just wake up and it's like, man, everything just seems like it's just crap, even if it's not. But some days we just have those moments where it just feels really heavy. There was a lot of days where it was just hard, and we were always worth it to one another, but the pain is just heavy sometimes. So even in seasons that everything's worth it, doesn't mean that it's just going to be easy. So we were very intentional. We tried to do everything we could. And then blending our children together, you were the very first person since my divorce that I ever introduced my kids to in a romantic way. Like there was never like, this is daddy's girlfriend. It was never anything like that. Yeah, that was a very sacred thing for me. And I was very protective of that with the kids, which is something I had to obviously struggle through. I was like, man, no one could break that barrier inside of my heart to allow me to let that happen for my kids. I could never find it. It was such a icky thing for me to ever think I could introduce someone like that, especially my girls. It was always like, these are my girls and I was their guy. I was the only one for them. In my girls' minds, they were the only girls for their daddy. There was just nothing else. Yeah, so oh, you dirty dog, you almost got me.
No, I definitely got you.
Got me a little bit. So yeah, just learning how to deal with my own fears of failure. What could this do to them if this were to fail?
That's heavy. That's some
That's
heavy stuff.
that was the scariest thing. That was my biggest hesitation of all. And because my plan, my plan for me is I'm just gonna be a dad. I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna search for this. And then you came along and messed up my plans in the perfect way. So yeah, just the perspective change, reminding myself like, man, this is such a beautiful thing, and it's so healthy in how we choose to love one another every day. And obviously, you have to trust one another. You really have to learn how to trust yourself in those moments and be able to face yourself in those quiet times. And you're looking within, like, man, am I making the right choice? Am I doing all of these things right, quieten everything down, all the fears and all the things that are around, especially from our past brokenness, learning how to push through all of that and sort through it all the mess going on up in our heads. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good example of a very real, tough, like real life circumstance. It was just very heavy.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff we talked about all the time. We were talking about how we went through the day being super intentional, and we had to be.
Yeah.
And that was something totally beautiful and unexpected that came out of our circumstances, which were negative and not ideal, which was it forced us to be super intentional. And because we were so present, it elevated every moment, every experience. It truly was walking through life like with eyes wide open versus like walking through blind. That was good.
For sure. Hey.
That's another thing that helped us was focusing on the positive ways that our negative circumstances were helping us,
Right.
or bringing more joy or more sacredness or more pureness or more healing to us and more growth. That was the biggest thing for me. Is it was like a pressure cooker of constant growth, constant having to face ourselves, face these fears, communicate those emotions, which is not like an easy thing. That's not something that I think people ever focus on, is anything good that can come out of something negative. But you and I, because of what we've been through in our stories,
Mm-hmm.
we have that perspective,
Mm-hmm.
which was super helpful. Like knowing that beauty can come from ashes,
Mm-hmm.
that there always is silver lining to be
It's true.
found,
Yeah.
even if everything looks hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't take a single second for granted. It was like every moment was cherished.
Right.
I also loved that we were making that choice together.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't like one of us was like, let's do this. And the other one was like, I don't know.
Right.
It was like we had to both
Mm-hmm.
make the choice and then hold each other accountable if one of us was having a harder day, because we were both committed to it. It's like we traded places, encouraging each other and reminding each other why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy to forget and lose sight of that perspective when you're overcome with hopelessness and disappointment. But because of that, it created so much intimacy and it brought us closer, like so much faster than I think a normal relationship that didn't have those circumstances. Learning how to let go of control. So few of us know how to do that actually in practice.
Yeah, it's true.
And so the better we get at that, there's more good things that can come in our life because we're not pushing them away out of fear that we just can't tolerate the pain that comes with them.
Right. I mean, we're so often just paralyzed by the thought of the pain that could come before we even feel it, that we just want to just give up and never even try. And it's not, like you said, it's not just all pain and suffering. It's the normal days. If our flight got canceled,
Oh my God.
You know, or getting
I'm like
sleeping at the airports, or like landing and our batteries dead. Like never ending things. It's like the good and bad. And I think in moments of unknown, everything can be so heightened. Those small little things become mountains in our minds, and
they magnify the
true.
Small things. One thing that really helped us when we were flooded by all those different emotions where they feel very real, determining whether it was like a part of us, like a wounded and broken part of us that felt that way, or like our true, what do we call it? Like
our authentic self.
But we called it something else. I can't remember.
It's 100% our true authentic self.
Okay. And then the language that we started using was, there's parts of me that are scared, right? I know that this is worth it, but there's still parts of me that fear this. Because then otherwise it becomes our identity and we embody that as a whole. Or we think that the emotion that we're in currently is the truth, rather than, okay, this is my authentic self having an emotional experience, and it's parts of myself that are being triggered, which makes sense considering my history of whatever. And so being able to detach our authentic self, our identity from these fears, differentiating what was real and what was all those other things.
Yeah.
My friend Amy likes to say, name it to tame it.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And it didn't always happen right away. Usually it was like the venting happens and the disappointment and
lots of self-loathing.
Yeah.
Like, this is just who I am.
Yeah.
And it's like,
or giving into that hopelessness, like this is just how it's going to be, but always coming back, making the commitment to, when we're calm, refocus, recenter, and then lean on each other to remind ourselves of the truth.
Yeah.
We still do that.
We do still do that. And it's important for us to not fully embody and take that on as our own identity. One of the tools we learned through that was, like you said, the word choices that we used of, this is not my authentic self. There's parts of me that are struggling today with insecurities or fears or doubts that this is too hard.
Taking accountability before we bring it to each other makes it easier for the other person to support us, because if the wounded parts of us are dealing with that pain and acting out of anger, which I never do, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to support me when I'm coming at you and fully embodying that wounded part of me. But when I am able to communicate in a way where I say, this part is feeling this, or I know that this isn't the truth, but I still feel this, then it doesn't trigger your protector part. When I come at you with that, of course, it's going to trigger you to protect yourself. It's going to trigger fears within you.
Yeah, ultimately it keeps us from being helped by the people that we love, because we are pushing them away when really what we want and what we need is their support and their love. What you're going through is just momentary, and you are going to be okay. And you're not alone in all of this.
So the root of all of this, which I feel like every episode that I've done so far, I say this in a different form. Healing and growth all comes back to the same root, which is coming back to our authentic self, understanding the root of the fear of the unknown, fear of releasing control. Once we understand it and we're able to identify it and separate ourselves from it, which is done through developing self-awareness and practicing mindfulness, then you are able to redirect it, which is the tangible part of how you deal with the fear of the unknown.
Right.
How do I get through this? How do I overcome this? How do I stop feeling anxious? This is how you do it.
Yeah.
Recognizing that it is happening within you, the emotional experience, right?
Yes.
Like, so from the beginning, going back to our story, it was recognizing that we were afraid of the pain that could happen if it didn't work out,
Right.
rather than just feeling the resistance. You're not currently willing to lean into that pain, and that's okay for where you are, but that's not really who you are.
Right.
Once we are able to recognize that that is happening within us and name it, then we can try to sort out and figure out where that is coming from.
Right.
Which is always a past wound of some kind.
Right.
And then redirecting it back to the truth.
Yes.
The truth is that life is always both. It's never this perfect, ideal circumstance.
No.
It's always both. If we can undo this belief that we've created that positive circumstances or knowing for sure or getting what you want or being able to control the outcome, if you are so convinced that that is the solution, well, then you're going to become a victim of your circumstance.
We walk through lives with expectations. If we are in a season of waiting or unknown, that it's like a bad thing. We just need to shift gears. The positive circumstances are what justifies a good season or a bad season of our lives. So just because we're in a season of unknown or things are going bad or they're hard, it doesn't mean that we always have to shift gears. And a lot of times we are under this misconception that if it's hard at all or if it's tough or we feel these moments of pressure that we have to like cut ties and just run. Like you said, we could have just ghosted each other, but we chose not to do that. We chose to communicate and stay and fight for this thing that we believed in, and there was no guarantees.
The joy isn't in the guarantee. The joy and the goodness, it doesn't exist when we know for sure that it's going to work out. It actually exists now in the present moment, because we never know like how long our season of waiting or unknown or whatever like our hardship is going to be for. So if we're waiting and we think that is the end goal, that is when you're going to feel good, that is when life begins or life doesn't feel hard, you're going to miss out on so much before that.
Right.
And so many people do.
Yeah.
It's like they limit their life experiences to only things that they know will happen in a positive outcome, or at least what they deem to be a positive outcome.
Right.
And so they're putting their life in this box of very little risk.
Right.
Our relationship and our journey of being together was a pressure cooker. That's another way we could have chose to look at it, or that we did choose to look at it, is this is an opportunity for us, regardless of whether it doesn't work out. Imagine how much we will grow and enjoy this gift for as long as we could, rather than just not having anything at all together. And regardless of what was thrown our way, regardless of the outcome, we decided that we were going to learn how to accept that somehow.
Healing is never easy. It is the hardest and most beautiful thing at the same time, but there's so much fear attached to that. It really is so much easier to be in a place of control and trying to control every little thing, but ultimately we miss out on the greatest joy in life, releasing that control and shooting for the stars, like really trying to reach for these moments that seem so unattainable.
It may feel like the easy way out by not leaning into it and by not risking it and by controlling the outcome, or only allowing yourself to have experiences where you know for sure. But it's not the easy way out, in that it's not easy to stay stuck, and it's not easy to continue to live in a state where we're constantly in fear and reacting out of fear. It's so much more fulfilling and satisfying when our life is made up of choices that are in alignment with our truest selves, and we're acting from that place. knowing that you are learning how to grow into who you actually want to be and were made to be and were created to be.
Yeah. It's always the double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a world where instant gratification is all we want. It's how we value so many things in our life. And it's like our measuring scale of all of these things. So it was very hard to have the distance in trying to truly do this thing in a way that is true, like purity, not letting the outside
slowly
things
seep in and like
correct.
Chip away.
All the things, all of our brokenness. It's a really hard thing to have this conversation, to have to stop and spend countless hours on healing these inner pains that are actually a really beautiful thing. But in the long run, it becomes the easiest path to choose to heal. And as it goes on, the most fulfilling.
Good one. I like how you
I didn't even mean to do that. Yeah, didn't even mean to.
When you choose to heal. I guess that means it was a very fitting name.
Yeah.
You mentioned instant gratification and how that's people's measuring stick, also lack of pain and the feeling of happiness. Those are the three ways that people gauge whether their life is great or not.
Right.
Yeah, it's just simply not the truth. Talking about all of this makes me really proud of us.
Me too.
Thanks for chatting with me. I always dreamed of someone I could sit on a podcast. Actually,
don't lie.
Back in the day, I never thought I'd have a podcast, but
I've always dreamed about lying on a podcast.
I always dreamed of doing life with someone who could have these conversations with me.
Me too.
So, my love, to wrap all of this up, what words of wisdom or advice do you have for someone who is currently in that season of unknown and struggling?
I would say lean into those moments where you feel fearful and you feel sometimes broken in it. Use the season as a tool for healing and learning how to persevere, to find out who you are. And we're constantly evolving throughout seasons in our life.
You're so smart.
So are you.
And that, my friends, brings us to the end of this episode. We will see you on a future episode, won't we?
Yes.
So you'll be back?
I will be back.
Yay.